side. I gotta get with my team. Hey, get up.
Tonight, panic and chaos in Charlottesville. A car plowing through counter-protesters down this crowded street. Protesters scrambling.
The car just plowed through hundreds of people downtown Charlottesville.
15 seconds later, the car shifting in reverse, screeching back down that street to get away.
So I felt in the middle of this reality that just a few generations ago, my family was enslaved to John's family. And then now we're sitting at the table with both of our daughters. So the process of catching up, the process of feeling comfortable, feeling what seemed like the energy of the ancestors in that room, John and I voicing what they couldn't voice, doing what they legally couldn't do, that room felt just chock full of energy, history, spoken stuff, unspoken stuff. I was ready just to pass out at the end of the evening because I felt like I time traveled. And I felt the weariness from that. It's positive, but I could feel all those energies I just mentioned, and that made the moment very surreal. So I tried to answer questions and stay in the moment. Other than a funeral or something, that was very overwhelming. This is Reverend Dr. Alex Gee with Black Like Me. So I want people to know that inside my family's story is embedded a segment, a sample, a microcosm of American history. And perhaps in telling it in a narrative form, people will be engaged and will be invited in to understand this really did happen, and it happened in the life of someone we know or respect or whose podcast we listen to. Because if we understand that that's the reality, and there are residual effects, and there were things in place that made a system like slavery possible or even necessary. If we understand that, and history has shown us that slavery is the result, Jim Crow was the result, Reconstruction was the result, then I think we have a chance to move forward. But if we don't know what we're fighting, if we don't know really what the history was, then it's hard for us to really be collective in our plan to really address these ugly issues. And again, I just think it's so ironic that while I was meeting white relatives in New Orleans and understanding or at least personalizing on an even greater level how so much of my family's, their bodies, their sexuality, their minds, their money, their resources, their children were stolen, men were carrying tiki torches in Charlottesville talking about how civil rights has robbed them of their rights as white men. It's interesting how they were focused on legislation that happened in their lifetime or their parents' lifetime. And John and I were talking about the residual effects of a slave system that operated in this country legally for 4 centuries. I just find that that's ironic that I'm the product of rape and theft and treating people like chattel property. And you have white privileged men lamenting the fact that America is being stolen from them and they want to make it great again. I think once you wrestle with the reality of history, none of us were responsible for it, just happened. Yeah. But I think when you focus on what you have in common rather than who's the other, it makes you band together as a team or a tribe or a group. That's a different way of thinking about things. And right now, this really is what America is. And, I know I carry within me some of the Native American reality, but the truth is we can focus on our differences, but we're a composite of American history and culture and sociology, and I think if we learn to embrace that and understand how we got here, we can really move ahead. So this is propelling me to be hopeful about the future by reconciling on a very personal and family level. I think it then helps me to look at what reconciliation looks like on a more systemic level. So this is really motivating me to process what this means, and like looking at you and think, oh my God, we're related. I have to keep just saying we're related.
But sitting at this table and talking about that, when you look at what America really is, you look at the Declaration of Independence. This is really what America is all about. Sitting here at this table. having these conversations. And there are more commonalities than there are differences. Similarities, I guess, would be a better
Not
word.
to be pessimistic, but let me tell you, there's some hard nuts to crack.
Definitely. And I run from them. I run from them.
Yeah.
And I think on America's best day, we really are America. But I think so much stuff got in the way of even the founding fathers and leaving out women
Right.
and people who didn't own land. That I think if America were ballsier, this would have been who America is. And maybe it's taken us 200 plus years to begin to say this really is who we are. Because if we all believe that we have a seat at the table and can work together and root for each other, it makes it a lot simpler to work together rather than seeing each other as competition. The thing about history that's both beautiful and scary is that it means different things depending on the context in which you view it. For example, the first time I offered this history course, President Barack Obama was president. And so to talk about the history of slavery with a black man in the office sort of conveyed, even in unspoken ways, that we are greater than our past, it has not held us back, and the American dream is real. With the last time I've talked about this, Donald Trump is in the White House. We're having marches of white males who are supremacists, who are bemoaning the fact that their rights and their America has been taken away from them, and they want to make it great again. I think what's even more frightening about looking at history today is that the majority of Americans don't realize that we're probably closer to the most ugly point of our history racially than we've been in about 100 years.
In light of everything you just said, which is very emotional, physically, do you feel there should be some kind of reparation system? And it's not even in a complicated sense, in a grant for scholarships, money. I mean, like,
that's a question I'm really wrestling with. Do the G's owe that? Does the U.S. government owe that?
Yeah.
I think the U.S. government does. When you think about the wealth that was amassed and how in this country and how America became a world power, and we're basically a baby nation, and to have only been incorporated for just 2.5 centuries, and to think that we're a world military power, educational power, economic power, and not fully acknowledge that this was built on the backs of free labor, and then call those same people who worked for free, whose backs were ripped open, whose babies were sold, whose breasts were given to white babies at the risk of their own, and then to turn around and call us lazy and put us in prison and feed drugs to our streets because we want a piece of the American pie that we freaking, can I say that on the air?
Go ahead.
That we freaking baked. I mean, we made it, picked the apples, made the sauce, made the crust, and baked it, and now we're angry, or I'm uppity because I want to challenge American history because I'm educated enough to know that this has happened. So there's nothing I really want from the G's other than the chance to live out a full circle sort of experience where we can work and talk to redeem the past. But I think I think that black people are owed a lot, and whether that's free college or support or special interest loans or something for ownership, we have proven that we're industrious and that we're compassionate. But to be criminalized on top of all of that is just cruel and unusual punishment. The excitement over this project has come in ebbs and flows because there are times I'm very excited about it, and then there's times where the history almost becomes depressing. And I think, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to tell all my family business. And then there are other times I'm thinking, well, I don't want people to feel like I'm portraying them in a negative light, but this is American history. And I think when it becomes personalized, when someone you know or someone who you can listen to talks about this experience, it might help people to contextualize some of the racial tension that we're wrestling with today. And I think in telling this story, I'm trying to move the healing of the races and this agenda of more inclusion, greater diversity, greater synergy ahead. I'm not trying to take us a step back because sometimes when you talk about these issues, people think that you're being divisive. But I really feel that this is an educational opportunity to understand the history of slavery and race relations by being involved in helping to tell this story. And I'm hoping that you are as transformed in this process as I have been.
That initial meeting was pretty incredible, and I felt the flood of emotions, some happiness, but a lot of sadness. It caused me to look forward, but I looked backwards a whole lot. And so I knew that it was important for my team to find some space in the hotel and sit down and really process, decompress, talk about what we saw, didn't see, what we heard, what some of our feelings were, because that would be really important to the project. And so I sat down with my sister Lilada and my assistant Tyler and just really started to process what that day meant for me and what would it mean going forward.
I know if nothing else, I'm going to have even more discussions.
With who about what?
I'm going to keep. I can't just back away from this race issue and just, I'm checking out, I don't care. I'm re-upping for another season. I don't know what all it means. I'm going to be processing it. I know I just got a whole lot of data.
But I think it's also important that you let it resonate with you first.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you as a person, as a black man, as a father? And what do you want your descendants to understand about it? What do you want Lexi to carry forward about it? And then go to those other levels. But how does this shape you, like you're talking about, resonating with Henderson Gee? You know, because that's not the image of the family that you grew up with.
Right.
And how do you, redeem that and own it, because there's all these other layers, because, your dad wasn't there with you growing up. So this part of this is reclaiming your own identity and the redemption in that.
Right, and I think you're right. I think it'll take a little time to process that. I mean, we look at white people all the time and talk about slavery, y'all were slave owners, but you don't know who's who.
Right.
All them white people descended from slave owners.
My God.
All of them. And you're living in, and I know people worked hard, and they kind of made that point. I think Paul was really clear in saying, yeah, you dropped the O off. I kind of helped him out by saying you dropped the O off your name, but that was becoming white. You went from being Irish to being white.
Yes.
To being American. And if you really thought that your hard work would do that, then leave the freaking O on your name.
Right.
You know that O was a target. What do I take off my name? I think that's part of what I want to take. They could do that to succeed.
Right. They had to do that. You had to become white in America to live the white dream.
Right. I mean, they stopped being Welsh to become American.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know I was Irish until about 6 months ago.
Oh.
And apparently my grandma's 100% Irish.
What?
And I didn't even know that. And I knew I was, my other grandma's 100% Polish, but her story was like, she would always ask her grandma, who was the one who came over on the ship, like, can you tell me about like our history and all that? And she's like, no, you don't want to know about that. There's times that are past. You need to move forward here. And so
That's
like
a big push.
that ability to do that. So like for me, I don't know anything about my heritage. And I haven't done any ancestry work, but like when it comes to me knowing anything just by family lines, I know nothing, because that's what whiteness tells you to do. It's
Right.
like, don't acknowledge.
Let's
things
just be
like
the
that.
same.
You're just white.
Yeah.
And
There's power in numbers and whiteness.
So you have no concept about how to trace your family back. Like when we sat there and said first cousin, second cousin.
oh, I have no knowledge. Nothing.
But what is Nyland?
I think it's Swedish.
That's what I was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So like that traces through my grandpa's on my dad's side, but it's not like overwhelming. He's not like complete majority Swedish. He's got a lot of some differentness in there. But yeah, I mean, I'm majority Polish and Irish, and I know nothing about what that means.
And so, if people wanted to defect from whiteness, you wouldn't even know how to embrace being Irish and what that means, and celebrating it, or laughing at it, or wearing green, or
No, and it'd
digging
feel really,
into it.
I'd feel really like I was taking over a culture that wasn't mine. Or I'd be like,
You're right, but what culture is yours?
at this point, I mean, I've just been like steeped in whiteness and like that disassociation from that for so long.
And that's painful. That's painful to the soul.
Well, and I think there's some school of thought that says the more white people become, the less tolerance or appreciation they have for ethnicity.
Right.
But when white people become more in tune in their own ethnicity,
They can appreciate it.
there's a deeper level of appreciation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, particularly you see it in Wisconsin. You know, still after all these years, there's a Swiss town, and there's, you know, New Glarus, and all these towns that have these festivals that are
Germantown.
Right, that continue to celebrate culture, Oktoberfest, and all these things. You know, so there's a certain level of appreciation, and even, you know, in our lifetime, we clearly saw even with Italians. When we were in middle school, the Italians we knew, they were like, "I'm not white, I'm Italian."
Mm-hmm.
But then they became white at some point.
Right. And so embracing your Irish heritage is not embracing whiteness.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping this process helps you to not be ashamed of your heritage, maybe even gives you permission just to ask questions about what that means, because there are cultural things, religious things, faithful things that come out of that tradition that has no doubt shaped you.
Yeah, there's probably a ton of personal stuff that you
Yeah.
don't recognize when you actually, because like I just don't know what even Irish or Polish means.
Right.
Like, I have no concept for like what is an Irish
Sure.
heritage usually associated, or what sort of
Sure.
influences are there. So that'd be an interesting.
But it's yours, even though you don't even know it. It's
Yeah.
still just as much yours as
Yeah.
somebody who knows it.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's in you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just that discovery or uncovering process is an interesting idea.
Today makes me want to soar and become who I'm supposed to be. Because clearly with all the stuff that's going on, from Van Buren to Reconstruction to segregation, Jim Crow to Trump, black people are still flying out of space, running hospitals, making movies, topping box office. So I want to be aware and speak out against injustice while at the same time not making a single excuse for myself. And really just become all that I'm meant to be. Because part of the trap is mental. So that you don't even have to try to push against the systems. And I want the systems to try to stop me rather than to have never begun. Because I just counted myself out. And if after all this time, survival is still in my blood, success is still in my blood, if I can be comparable to where they are and they have a 150-year head start on me, I'm not complete a victim. You know, every white person that I've ever interacted in my life was not related to me. Not one single white person that I ever met could say that their relatives or ancestors owned my relatives or ancestors. Here I am sitting with someone who's white, has the same blood in their veins. Our daughters are blood related to each other. No white person has ever been closer to my story as a black American in this country. And I felt comfortable in my black skin sitting at the table. I didn't feel that I needed to be articulate or smart or prove anything to him. I mean, I don't try to do those things. I try to represent myself and my family in the way in which I should, the way my mom has trained me to do. But it hit me that I don't have to perform for him or any other white person or any other white man, be it a funder, professor, president, governor, mayor, county executive. Somehow, and I don't understand why, it felt like a very spiritual moment. At that moment, I became reconciled with my history, myself, my faith, and my destiny. And I felt like I exhaled in a way that I never had before. We've made some progress. And I'm sure that what Jackie and I have to say to Lexi is nothing like what Venus had to say to Henderson. But just the fact that my colleagues and my black peers were still teaching our folks, particularly our black boys, if a light is out, you can't drive at night. If your plates are not current, you can't drive at night. All these different things we've got to do so that people don't move out of their place because it could mean something very dangerous for their lives. Certain things are not legal anymore. You know, you can't legally burn crosses on people's lawns. You can't lynch them. You can't do these things. But there's unspoken things that you can still do. You can still blacklist people. You can still not hire them. You can still use their backgrounds against them. You can still profile their names on applications or resumes because it sounds ethnic. You can still shoot black men and say you felt threatened even though they had a cell phone or nothing. When you think about how electricity has progressed since when Henderson was born in 1847, the automobile industry, there were no jet planes. There were no skyscrapers. But if you look at the way the voting rights, the housing rights, the educational rights, the political access that has happened or not happened over the past 150 years for black folks, it's maddening. I mean, people walking around the moon would just be comic book stuff, but it happened. But yet you have Henderson's great-great-grandson still being profiled by and pulled over by police and never ticketed because I fit the profile of a drug dealer or because they want to know I'm in my own parking lot at my own church on a Saturday night where I work. That reality that culturally America has not made the kinds of moves that it has made economically, technologically, medically is quite amazing. And I don't feel America calling America out on that. America can do whatever it wants to do if it wants to do it. America has chosen to not make greater strides in this area. And that's what infuriates me.
And it took 2 amendments to the Constitution, but now Lexi can vote and voted in the last election, and it took 1 amendment for me to get there. And, it's like, even though it seems slow and it's really discouraging when you turn on the news, change does happen.
So I'm sitting here with my sister, Lilada, and we're reflecting upon our trip to New Orleans last year. And we just listened to this clip, Lilada, of our cousin talking about, experiences. We're sitting around the table trying to feel our way through the fact that we're black and white and we're relatives. In fact, at one point you asked to the white family members, have you all met other black relatives before? Because you seem to be relatively comfortable here in this space. But this comment that we just heard says, some of this has been slow coming, but we've made up for the past because, they can vote, Lexi can vote. And it reminds me of discussions that I've had my entire adult life. Alex, haven't we made progress? I mean, slavery's bad, Jim Crow is over. I think what I want to just process, at least from your perspective as we listen to this discussion, because you and I both know, I'm a pastor, I do counseling, you're a social worker, you do healing work. You can't really begin to address issues until you've addressed issues. You cannot offer solutions until you've diagnosed an issue. And I think part of what hinders us in race relations is we haven't really claimed how ugly the issues are, how residual they are, and how we still are wrestling with them. So when you hear this comment just saying, look at where we are today, I can vote, Lexi can vote, does it remind you also of the rhetoric of some of our white colleagues? Aren't we better than we used to be? Aren't we done with this? Aren't we okay now? Have you heard that in your career as well?
I have, and as a matter of fact, I've been having some discussion on Facebook, and I keep having white people and black people, saying, oh, but you have to vote. You got to get the vote out. And I think really having the vote is important. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But I think, because she was talking about how I can vote, Lexi can vote. Aren't we all the same now? And my whole thing is that I think the right to vote is a dream that we've been sold by white people. Like, once you get the right to vote, ooh, now things are really good for black people. And it hasn't been that. And voting is not enough. So I think that when we're looking at voting, political power, education, and things of that nature, there's a lot of things that are common. As we've talked about, us being the first generation of people in our family that didn't pick cotton for a living.
Right. Our mother was a sharecropper, as were her siblings.
She picked cottons and cherries and beans and everything.
Right.
Oh my, so that I could sit across from a colleague. We went to the same college, we work at the same place, and she can assume that we're on an equal playing field because we are kind of neck and neck, which part of me says, ooh, white folks, what do you think about that? That it took us one generation. Actually, with our mom, she did it. She made it up in her own time.
She went
her
from
own
picking
lifetime.
cotton to getting a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin.
But then when you look further and you look at the type of stress that I endured, the type of stress that I carried down from my mom,
Sure.
the things that I have to go through, even though we can both vote, we can both live in the same neighborhood, our experiences still aren't the same in America.
So you're saying voting is not the silver bullet, like it doesn't.
It's not.
Well, particularly if the candidates haven't changed it. This is something I've heard you say. If we're voting, but if whites are not voting for black candidates, and we're not getting the same, they're not getting the same kind of support.
And even supporting black candidates to run, because for me, what is the difference me voting for one white man for another white man, and neither of them are tuned into my issues as a black woman, as a black mother? What difference? That doesn't feel powerful. Now, what does feel powerful for me to be able to make decisions in my own self, in my own family, my own community that makes the place better. But you're not going to convince me voting one white man against another. You know, it's like somebody recently said, there's not Republican or Democrat. It's the haves and the have-nots, and that's America. I think it's easy to say that we've caught up, but what white people don't understand is that we may be running on the track at the same place, but I got a whole backpack full of shit that I'm carrying that they don't have to carry, things that I have to deal with. You know, I don't have the family cabin up north that when I'm feeling stressed out, I can go up there and chill out and relax. You know, I'm carrying the stress of a mother who did pick cotton for a living and everything that came with the poverty that she endured. You know, so it's not equal.
Sure. And to our white listeners who may say, well, I don't have a cabin up north. I mean, you're using that metaphorically, but I just want to clarify that because that's where sometimes we lose people.
Right.
But what we're saying is, you can walk down the street or into a bank if you're white and female, white and male. You know, you can walk in, and the assumption is not that you're one generation out of being a migrant worker or picking cotton. This is really the point that we're making. You know, let's use this analogy. I live in an apartment for 50 years, and you live in a home for 50 years. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You develop equity as you live in a home. Now you can say, well, we live on the same street. We're both walking distance from the local grocery store, the local movie theater, or the local mall. But the person who's owned for 50 years can use the equity in their home, second mortgage it to send their kids to medical school, law school, to build another house, to build a cabin up in the north.
Mm-hmm. To take a vacation. Right.
And so that's what I think you and I struggle with sitting at the table.
Right.
I think even now, even though it's been a year since we've been there, and then Cousin John's been up here, I keep processing things where, when I went down there, I didn't want to look, I didn't want to sit there and look like, like when we were growing up, I don't know if you remember this, but like mom would not want us to go over anyone else's house and eat. Like, don't you go to somebody's house looking like you're hungry or like we're not feeding you, like you sort of put on this, this front that you're okay.
And that is a direct benefit of poverty.
Right. So that we don't look poor.
Right.
Everybody, right. You don't go over there looking that way. And so I think going down to New Orleans, I want to make sure that it didn't look like I wanted something. I got an attorney. I'm going to get my 40 acres and a mule. So it felt very good for you and I to sit there with our degrees and what our families are doing and what we've accomplished and how we've traveled around the world. That felt very good. But then in the next moment, I was very conscientious of the fact that I didn't want to somehow give the impression that because we had made it, because of tremendous strides that our mother made, that there are no real systemic realities. That's capturing people. So we embody that struggle that we have experienced a level of success, black or white. The things that we have done is successful. It's not successful for black women or black men.
Right.
We've got some degree of success. We've traveled around the globe. If you and I start adding up the countries we've been to, if you start looking at the stamps in our passports, you and I have traveled internationally since we were college students. And not many of our white colleagues have done that. So, but at the same time, you're followed around when you go into a store. I was pulled over by the police in our church parking lot. So there are still those things that we carry. And it's hard for the white community to understand that we live within that tension every day, a degree of success, but we can name you 15 people who are trapped, who are just as smart, just as equipped, just as articulate, but somehow they got snagged in poverty, drug addiction, scars of abuse, depression, unchecked mental health issues. So you and I have got to work to heal and open doors for other people while still celebrating our own
I think white people oftentimes feel like things are better because of some things that they did, because of laws that they passed, because of, you can now go to school with my kids and all these kind of things. But we have not, as a people, had success. Because of white people, we've had success despite of white people. Despite the pressures and the racism that still exists, we still push through. And unfortunately, there are way too many that have fallen through the cracks.
So when people are pushing to say, aren't things better, they're looking at efforts, laws and things that they have changed.
Right.
Rather than just looking at
what
blacks have done in spite of all of that.
We're not racist anymore. And if you just look solely at, education and the desegregation of black schools, white people feel real good about that. But the white people didn't have to come into black neighborhoods and go to black schools and be taught by black teachers.
Right.
Our black kids had to, under armed guard, we know the story, under armed guard had to be taken into these schools. And So
from Jump Street, being in that white space was threatening, caused anxiety, and you got to still compete in algebra trig.
Right.
And there's an armed guard in case somebody tries to shoot you, and you have to believe that white armed guard
is going to protect you.
Is going to protect you.
And I really question, and I believe that parents that sent their kids to these schools had good intentions. But there's no black person that I know that would work under those conditions, that in order for you to go to work, an armed guard has to go there to protect you because your life has been threatened.
But
so
the children
I don't know why we allowed that to happen for our kids. And the unfortunate thing is that it has not meant progress for our kids. Black and brown kids throughout the United States continue to struggle because they're in schools that traditionally were white schools who never wanted black and brown kids to go there.
Right.
And they still really don't, if the truth be told. Now, there's some excellent educators out there, don't get me wrong, but it is still, in 2018, we're trying to bend the curriculum. We're trying to bend the school policies to, if we're trying to bend them at all, to fit in black and brown kids.
But when they were our schools, there was no bending.
There was no bending.
It was the curriculum, and kids did well.
And kids did
very
well.
I told you this too, Lilada. One of my mentors said that when schools were integrated, over 30,000 school teachers lost their jobs because it wasn't true integration. Black kids were absorbed, but not the black teachers. And here's
teachers, administrators, janitors. Well, they probably kept the janitors.
School teachers in the school and the cooks. But let me tell you something. Here's where the white community missed out. There were black people, of course, during Jim Crow who were getting education because the historic black colleges, the HBCUs, started like over 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So you would have black people who were botanists, chemists, biologists, which meant they had advanced degrees in these areas because they couldn't practice or work at DuPont, I'm just making up some names, or Dow Chemical Company. They taught schools. Mm-hmm. So in the black schools, the school teachers were not education majors who had a specialization in chemistry. They were chemists. They were botanists. They were biologists. So black kids were having master level black teachers teaching them. That would be like having, an astronaut teach you astrophysics rather than your science teacher who read up on it 2 weeks before you did. So the level of education in black schools was tremendous. So we didn't just lose black Phi-Ed teachers. We lost black botanists and chemists and biologists who were teaching us these things. That's why black kids were going to Meharry and Xavier, and they were going to medical school, nursing school. They were becoming CPAs. And so we just sort of think that because it was black, it was run down and tore up.
Right. But even the rundown, tore up schools still had teachers that loved those students, that modeled family, that modeled work, that modeled, good living.
Well, you see them at Sunday school. You might sit next to them on the pew. What I was just showing is, you're right, they loved you, but I wanted to show their pedigree as well, because why would you not want a chemist teaching chemistry in a white school?
I mean, I absolutely agree with you, but the other level of the love is what I'm not seeing in traditional schools. I'm not seeing the love for black kids.
Well, I'm butchering it, but Jawanza Kunjuf, an educator from Chicago, said you can't teach somebody you don't love, and you can't love somebody you don't respect.
Right.
And so it goes back to the whole love if you're going to be teaching them. That's
right, and having that sense of comfort, because even to this day, I hear black kids say all the time that they don't feel welcome, they don't feel comfortable, and how can you conversely, how can you learn from people that you feel don't
And a
love you,
big-
don't respect you?
Yeah, and a large chunk of your professional work as a consultant, as an educator of educators, is that you do face-to-face work with children. So this is not something you read in essence, or
Right.
this is what students are saying to you who are part of your groups. And so, I
So
think
we're not all caught up.
we're not all,
And it's not all equal, because there's still these other pressures
right.
that you have to endure as a black person in
Yes.
America.
So then the question to us should not be, aren't we caught up?
Mhm.
It should be, how do we catch up? That's
Right.
one of the things I was saying to my colleague this morning. I was saying, he was, we're asking the wrong questions. We're having white people set an agenda for what we think equity looks like, and not even asking us until it's ready to go in print. And sometimes it's already in print to edit it. But again, I want to stress the question should not be, haven't we caught up? What does being caught up look like? And why in 2018 do people still not think we're intelligent enough to articulate what black families need to really thrive?
I don't know if that is really what the issue is. The issue is that the majority of white people don't want to know what black families need to thrive. They don't want to be burdened by that question and what the heaviness of what it means. They don't want to think that somehow that Dakota is doing so much better than Tyrone because Tyrone has had pushbacks. They don't want to think that. They want to think Dakota is advanced.
Right.
So all of these things, they don't want to feel like they got their job because you were held back. They want to feel like they got their job out of merit, and they got their wealth because they worked hard. And
You're stepping on toes now.
Well,
but you're telling the truth.
And I want to ask white people, like, what is hard work? Hard work is not sitting at a desk pushing some papers around. Hard work is cleaning somebody's ass. Hard work is, slaving in somebody's house. Hard work is what we see people doing in the hot sun in yards and things like that today. CNA workers, that's hard work, and so people get confused, I think, hard work with work that gives you a lot of money.
And it might have pressure, but not.
Right. So I think, if white people have to be faced with things still are not fair and equal, then they have to be faced with, maybe I have things that I didn't earn.
I was having lunch with a friend. This is like back in the early 90s. I was into having more one-on-one conversations with white colleagues who needed to somehow either be convinced or coached that racial issues still exist. I'm trying to give my time now towards folks who get it, and they need to still be shaped as allies. That's still good. That's still hard work.
That's still very hard work.
That's still very hard work. But in one of our meetings, he's older than I am. He started crying, and he said, "This is hard. I'm scared. I don't know how to go back and undo this, or what I say to my son. I don't know how to talk to him about his school that's named after slave owners." Now, my whole talk is not how you need to go change schools. I got folks that are afraid about the kids being shot, or the kids are being told not to apply to college. I don't have enough time to go to meetings about changing the names of schools named after dead white presidents. We have to change the name of money and stuff too. We got to do a whole lot. And the ethos is there. You can change the name of a building, but the ethos is still there. But he started crying because it was hard work, because he did not want to shift his whole paradigm. You know what it is? It's like finding out Santa Claus is not real. But the work really is thinking, maybe I didn't get it all because I'm the smartest.
Right.
Because we do this U.S. Black History course, but around this 9 sessions, around the 4th session, I see this old crap look in the eyes of the white intelligentsia, because one guy raised his hand and he said, "I know that I've been lied to about your history, but I did not know that I've been lied to about my history, and now I'm scared because I don't know who I am." And so the whole sense that now the weight, the incumbency of the weightiness of this knowledge, that we have been handed something unduly in an unjust manner, is only parallel to the false sense of inferiority that's handed down to black people. So why should white Americans not carry the burden of that reality? Because we're constantly fighting against their sense of inherent superiority.
So white people have false superiority, and I'm just throwing out a statistic, but I bet you if you could incentivize enough white people to honestly answer the question, do you feel that white people are superior to black people intellectually,
morally,
socially, morally, that 60% would say yes.
I bet you'd be higher.
I'm trying to be nice.
I bet you'd be higher. Because
if they were 100%
because it's what you're fed, is what because let me tell you why I know white people believe that. And we say this, it's our show, so we don't have to do the whole disclaimer thing. We're not saying 100% of white people everywhere, but we know it because those teachers taught us that we were inferior. So what's the basis of it?
Right.
Why the hell do you show us a picture of a black person, an African person with a chain around their neck every year in elementary school? Because you started school in Madison or later, but I did Head Start, kindergarten first in Chicago. I never heard the word slave until I came to Madison.
Well, and even I can remember when I was in like third grade.
I've never heard the word slavery until I came in second grade, because my black teachers didn't think that it was important to talk to me about that I'd been a slave, because I had been an inventor, a doctor, surgeon, a pastor, a community leader, etc. They talked about the things that we were doing currently. This was in the 1960s. Why do people in Madison, Wisconsin need to take a school that's 2% black? It was just me, David, and I think Ron, and black kids in my. Why take us through a slave unit in social studies? How does that help fifth graders at Aldo Leopold School?
It helps white kids, because after I got my lesson, when I believe I was in third grade, about Abraham Lincoln, I'm at a playground and a white girl walks up to me and said, "You should be grateful to us." Like, for what? You should be grateful to us because we freed you from slavery.
I remember you telling me that.
And that's how the lesson was taught. Like, the Great White Hope came and freed us from slavery. So the white kids need to hear that, because immediately that white girl felt inferior.
Yes.
I mean, felt superior to me.
Right.
She felt like
you should be beholden to her.
Not only was I a slave, right, but somehow the greatness of her whiteness, like,
probably her Christianity.
It's like, you weren't there.
But she was. She was.
So I think those lessons are taught to help white kids feel really good about themselves.
So you're saying that our educational system has been a system of indoctrination of white inferiority, white superiority.
Absolutely.
I agree with you.
Absolutely, because that was the best example of what that girl was able to articulate to me, and I had never felt less than until that moment. Even though, like you were saying, there was only a few of us black kids.
But you never felt it.
No.
I tell the story a lot because I love Alice E. Turner. She was my first grade teacher. When we moved to Madison, she was my pen pal. And I moved to Madison when I was 6. She sent me a Bible when she heard that I was interested in ministry as a 17-year-old. And I got a chance to visit her before she died when I was a month away from graduating with my doctorate degree. Wow. I love the fact that she's watched my whole trajectory of my life and career. But when I said in her class in first grade that I wanted to be the president of the United States, she wrote it on the board, didn't laugh about it. It wasn't like, okay, come on, Alexander, let's find something else you want to do. She wrote, Alexander, I love that she called me Alexander too. Alexander will become the president of the United States. I didn't find out that I was a slave until I moved to Madison, was liberal, northern, Big Ten territory,
Never had segregated schools.
Right, just very open, very. Not
legally segregated.
Mom said she remembers me coming home in second grade. She says, Alex, I remember a light going out in you, and you asked me, Mom, were we slaves? What are you doing telling a 6-year-old kid they were slaves in 1970? But folks who are listening, just ask questions. I don't need you to lead a revolt. I don't need you to do anything out of the ordinary. When you sit on boards, when you sit in a classroom, when you go to your children's PTA meeting, when you see that the books that second graders are reading, the picture books, are promoting this sense of cultural superiority, just ask the questions. Where are the black authors? Where are the black teachers? Where are the black board members? When discussions are being made about those people or where they live or their education, ask, where are the black people and why aren't they at the table? This is why we get stuck. And so we really can't begin to get better until we understand, well, yeah, you and Lexi can vote, but how long have you been voting? And
vote for who?
And vote for
we're still having first in 2018.
Right, first.
We still have it, political first.
Right, because if you go back 100 years ago, there are 16 men in Congress, 16 black men in Congress who were elected by black people who were given the right to vote. And then, many of the white folks said, oh, hell no, and then instituted the grandfather clause and the poll tax and the literacy.
And jurisdiction and changing lines,
gerrymandering
voting
and
lines.
all of that kind of stuff, the birth of a nation. And so it's really regaining a right that was given to black folks in the 1860s. So if you think about the fact that we're still experiencing first, when we had first in the 1890s and 1900, you got to ask, did we just go to sleep? Did we take a sleep pill? Did we Rip Van Winkle it? So Lilada, we went down to New Orleans. Cousin John came up. We enjoyed our time with him.
It was fantastic.
So we're wrestling with this. So we're not saying that we can't take the G experience into a new direction. I think it's somewhat incumbent upon us to talk about our experiences because ours is the microcosm of black life in America. That except we've been able to find the actual folks who are G's, who are descendants from the plantation. They're descendants from the slave owner. So I think that makes our story a little different because we know who they are. We've met them. We've eaten it there. We've eaten with them in the South. We've eaten with them here. But you and I have to still carry the same story that even though we can sit at the same table and sing Kumbaya, it does not mean that mass incarceration, these educational issues, these health disparities are not very real and very prevalent. Right. So you and I have to be very careful to live in this tension that we have to call out the systemic realities while at the same time continue to pursue excellence because our moms worked hard so that we could sit at that same table. History dictated that we're not in the same position, but decisions that our family made have determined that we can sit at the same table, and our children will do that with their white counterparts. And so
white people need to know that there's still work that they need to do.
Exactly.
And that's why it's dangerous for white people. But isn't it better? No, because when you start saying, isn't it better? You're saying, I don't have work to do.
Right.
I personally have no responsibility to make this world the better for the next generation. And when I, went down to this civil rights trip, and I went down there and we were doing debriefing, one of the things that I told white people, I said, I don't need you all to tutor another black child. I don't need you to mentor another black child. As a white person, what I need you to do is figure out why you keep raising children that continue this system of racism and oppression. That's what I need you to do.
Figure that out. You know what? You should write a book or do a blog or something that's called White People, This is What I Need You to Do.
Right.
Because
maybe that'd be a segment.
Right, because our parents were raised and taught what not to do to incite white anger. Almost the way women have been trained to not make their abusive husbands angry.
Right.
Wear higher heels.
Don't
But
don't look white people in the eye.
Don't look them in the eye. Be on the porch when the sun goes down, so I know where you are. Say yes, sir, no, sir. Tell keep your hands on the wheel. To not appear to be a threat.
Right.
Not
don't
just
reach
to
for
not
anything.
Don't reach for anything. Move slow. All of these we have been taught how to respond to the reality. But unless our white counterparts are committed to the same things, we're not going to really see a change. And so when people are saying to us, Lilada, that things aren't things better, they're stifling our voices.
Right. And experiences.
Because it's almost like that's the goal. Because if I can prove to you that it's wrong. When I told about being pulled over by the police and being told that I fit the profile of a drug dealer, I was doing a training with a large group of white folks, and a woman raised her hand and she says, my husband drives a 1955, whatever it was, and he got pulled over by the police because they thought he was a drug dealer. I said, but when your husband got out of the car and stood up, did they still think he was a drug dealer? She just got quiet.
Right.
So afterwards I said, why did you feel the need to squelch my experience?
Right.
She said, because I couldn't stand the feeling that could really happen in this country. So I had to say something.
Because then I have to do something.
I have to do something.
Then I can't be comfortable in my white world.
Right. But it doesn't stop me from.
And don't take that away from me.
Right. So
did she start crying?
No, she didn't. That was before white women started crying during that. So this was back in the late 80s. But think about this. So but I had a chance to challenge her afterwards. But what about when you do that in a large auditorium and then people leave and they say, "See, it didn't just happen to Alex. It happened to her husband too." And but I had to call her out in front of that whole group. But then what happens is you have to defend your experiences, and then you're angry, then you're animated. Why can't my experiences just be my experience? Why can't I tell you? And it'd be different if that's the first time it happened to us as black people. When it happens again and again and again, we know what that feels like. So it's squelching our voices, which is why I'm glad you got your podcast. I've got this. We both write so we can tell it. But it exacerbates the issues of racism because we can never diagnose it. Right. And so what I want to say to would-be white allies who listen to us, who follow us, when you hear a person of color, let's just speak specifically, black people talk about their issues, rather than taking care of yourself, white friend. Right. Listen to what that person has to say, because regardless of how uncomfortable it made you feel in hearing me say I was pulled over by the police and told I fit the profile of a drug dealer, I still live with it every day. So say what you want to negate it, but guess what? I go home reliving that whenever the police is behind me. So let go of the control issues. Listen to the person and the guilt. Listen to it. And then don't assume you can do anything to fix it. Don't ask them what you can do. There's nothing she could say to take that experience away from me, except to share with other people, share with folks that you know who are police officers, share with folks who want to be police officers, share with lawmakers, share that this still goes on. Because you know what? If we had licked that problem in the 80s and 90s when we were talking about it. And in my community, so many black men who are in key positions, who work for the mayor, the county executive, the chancellor, key positions, were being pulled over by white police officers that they actually had to convene a meeting with the police chief. It had become so problematic. Now, fast forward to what's happening between cops and communities of color. This is what was coming, but nobody stopped it because it wasn't a real issue. What the officer said to me was, well, this is the blue blanket. And, what do you expect me to do? We do this, and sometimes we catch, crooks and drug dealers, and sometimes we pull innocent people over. But we're trying to clean up your neighborhood. What do you expect? The whole idea was
you should be grateful.
You should be grateful because I'm out here. I'm here cleaning up your community. But you had no reason to pull me over and tell me that I fit the profile of a drug dealer.
Well, and the sad thing is that ever since the end of slavery, white people haven't really been sure what to do with us, because when we were useful,
right.
When we were,
because the KKK did not exist in full force while slavery was in full force. Because why would
it need to be?
Because
the KKK was to control black people.
Well, they were the doctors, the judges, the police officers, and the pastors. To control black people and their wealth and their vote and all these things. But when black people started voting, you needed the KKK to put black people back in their place. So I'm excited to be able to tell this story about our genealogy. I feel that Lilada, you and I both were in the Afro-Am department as undergrad. We studied history and its impact on our world. And so we know that we can't move forward unless we understand that these things are real, that this has really shaped our culture, it's shaped our thought. It's sort of like, remember in geometry, we'd have to work on parallel lines, and there were proofs and things that you could do to
Please don't bring up geometry.
I know, I shouldn't even said that because I don't even know what I'm talking about. But if it's off, if it's not exactly parallel, a mile down the road, the gulf between those two things would be miles and miles and miles. Right. And so this has gotten off sync, off track, off beat. And unless we do something very major to pull it back in sync, back on track, we're going to continue to see these problems that we have. And so our voices are not meant to be divisive. We're actually a resource to this nation, to this country. We're called divisive because we're calling things out. But is your doctor divisive because they tell you we got to treat your gallbladder, your blood sugars are high? I don't need my doctor to be my friend. I need my doctor to detect what's not right in my body so that I can get better. So people need to listen to what we're saying and really begin to ask questions and listen and find out, how do you become an ally? And an ally is not just someone who's going to hashtag something or retweet something, but what questions do you ask? What things do you do to really make things better in this world? And so this genealogy process has been really interesting because you and I studied African American history And this was sort of textbook stuff. But for us to sit with John, have John sit with us, and to realize, wait a minute, this man is a blood descendant of the folks, of the people who got the Homestead Act, who raped our great-great-great-grandmother, gave her son Henderson the name Gee, hence starting the Black Welsh Gee family. But for us to step in and meet the actual players of something that just felt like history, it's like reading Uncle Tom's Cabin and then finding the real people. Like, these are not just fictional characters.
Right.
And so
this is real.
we now have the historical context. We now have the personally lived context. I think that puts us in a very enviable position to say, America, here's where we are. This is the story of Black folks. This is how we're going to rise up and say we demand equality. Here's how we're going to make sure that we find ways for funding, ways to have our voices preserved, because you and I need to grab everything that has not been grabbed by others in our generation or before us to make our voices known. We've studied it. We've lived it. We're the product of it. And if we don't have credibility in telling America and society how you work together on this, then who does?
Right.
But it's not going to be a 25-year-old law clerk. It's not going to be a newly elected congressperson that's never had a meaningful relationship with a Black person.
Right.
America better listen up to voices like ours, because on some days, we're America at its best. We've overcome all the shit that it's put on us. But we're also very angry and frustrated because you continue to say you haven't, you don't, and you won't.
Right.
And so America's got to ask, what kind of Black people do you want to deal with? Do you want to wake up to the truth? And do you want folks who can tell us how we move ahead? Because if we give this to the next generation, if white people bequeath this to the next generation, because we're teaching our children, hey, this is not true. Don't believe what they told you about Christopher Columbus. We're going to create this great and even greater gulf, which is older than Donald Trump and will exist far beyond him.
Right.
So while we're trying to vote to get him out, and we should, you got to understand he's not the only one. Let's get a whole bunch of people out and a whole bunch of people in who really know what they're doing and really want to speak up on behalf of what the real issues are. So being able to talk about this genealogy was incredible. I appreciated the fact that you went down with me to New Orleans. I'm so glad that you captured that, because it helps us to tell a great story that is really America's story through the lens of our family and through the lens of Black Gees. There's so much that I want to say with my podcast, and there's so much that I want to say through the story of my genealogy. We're at such a critical juncture racially as a country. And I think we're shocked because we know better. We have the advantage of history in our rearview mirrors, and we don't want to go back to those ugly places of separate but equal and Jim Crow and all those places. But yet we're finding that some of the sentiments resonate with those earlier periods of time, and I think it's scaring people, because we all would have collectively sworn this could not repeat itself in our lifetime. Our grandparents were stuck in some system and they might not have known how to break out, but that would never happen again in our lives or the lives of our children, and we are so polarized. And I think because history can be so polarized and we don't want to look at it and we don't want to talk about it, I want people to know, if you're white and male, America was not stolen from you. That I don't get up in the morning thinking that white men are my enemy, but there's a systemic reality. There are structural things in place that I fight every day. Sitting at the table with my cousin John, I realize that I am proof that those systems can be overcome. And I've had a strong family. I've had people who march for the rights of my family. I had strong faith and a lot of drive given to me through my mom, and a community that gave me space to really evolve into who I am. But none of that negates, and I must state emphatically, none of my success negates the fact that there are systemic realities keeping hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of poor people, African-American people, in places of disenfranchisement. And so, on one hand, I represent and reflect the American dream that you can evolve in spite of all of the circumstances in your way. You can evolve. But I'm also proof that there are systemic realities that are in place. Both of my parents were sharecroppers. That's what they did as kids. That's what their parents did. That's the residual effect of privilege, of greed, of thinking of Black people as second or third class property. It was just legal slavery. And so my name reminds me that slavery is real. What my parents did for the first developmental years of their lives is proof to me that these systems are in place. Being pulled over by the police in my church parking lot having my daughter's guidance counselor tell her that she would not be admitted into the University of Wisconsin-Madison, being followed in stores when I'm shopping, being handed car keys while I'm dressed in a suit and tie by someone coming out of a downtown club thinking that I was the valet. Those things remind me that we have not made the kind of strides that we need to, but I'm hoping that this story will make people look at history differently so that each person is compelled to learn more and do more, and to realize that in order for us to be successful in crossing this critical racial juncture, we all need to do something. But it begins with all of us learning something and believing something, that the system exists, and let's do our part and make things better for everyone. Here's what's inherently evil about racism. My ancestors closed their eyes, and they dreamed of an America or somewhere where their work would be compensated for, their children would be treated fairly, their families would stay intact, they could have a say-so in their government, the world, and they could control their own destiny. Many of my white colleagues and friends think that they opened their eyes and saw chains on their hands and their feet, or saw themselves nestled in some slave ship or confined to some plantation, and thought the chains impede that. Racism is not chains. It's the sense, the entitlement, the attitude, the paradigm that there were people who were shockable and chainable and boatable. And so 150 years later, 200 years later, 400 years later, I and other African Americans close our eyes. We dream of becoming doctors. We dream of owning property. We dream of selling bottles of water without having the police called, or walking down the street without being shot. And when I open my eyes, I don't see chains, because chains are not racism. Racism is an attitude. And the chains were illegalized 150, 160 years ago. But racism has never been illegalized because it has never been identified. And so it still exists. So there's a level of frustration and unease with other African Americans, because with chains you could say, I'm really sorry you can't be free. Those chains impede that. It's not the chains that impede access. It just reminded people and society of who had access to real opportunity. And so today our struggle is not the chains. It's the residual effects of the original paradigm that felt that some were better than others, some more entitled than others. This is the ugliness of racism, is that it's not defined by chains, it's defined by the system that limits people whether they use chains or not. And this is the reality that America has got to wake up to, or we're going to do more than just repeat history. We're going to celebrate it. We're going to legalize it. And we're going to call ourselves great because we've done so.
This story is far from over. A little more than a year after I met John in New Orleans, I invited him to Madison to continue this dialogue. He had invited me to his home, so I wanted him to spend time with my family here in my home. And so if you want to hear about a real personal interaction we had, a conversation we had here in Madison, listen to episode 3.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex Gee's amazing work at www.alexgee.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.